If you've ever done a world history course, you'll be familiar with the term British Empire. But just how big was it? How much of the world did the British control at its peak? And what might this map look like if we go back in time? Well, that's exactly what we're going to find out in this video. Let's get started. Let's begin by looking at the origins of the empire. During the 1500s, England came onto the world stage following the discovery of the Americas and the start of the Age of Exploration. At this point, the two superpowers were Portugal and Spain. But England would soon become a third great power following the defeat of the Spanish Armada in 1588. This began a period of English growth known as the Tudor period, which lasted until 1603 and saw the beginnings of the British Empire. During this time, England came into conflict with Spain in both North America and Europe. In North America, the first permanent English settlement was Roanoke, founded in 1585, though it was abandoned by 1590. However, England would not try again until the early 1620s when they established the Virginia Company, which would lead to the founding of Jamestown in 1607, the first successful permanent English settlement. The Virginia colony would become an important part of the British Empire. Another key component of the empire's origins was the British East India Company, a company formed in 1600 with the goal of trading with the East Indies. Eventually, the company became so powerful that it began ruling large parts of India, creating their own judicial system and even minting their own currency. This would lay the foundations for the later British Raj. In Ireland, the English had been involved since the 1100s, but it wasn't until the reign of Henry VIII that the English began to conquer Ireland. By the end of Elizabeth I's reign, most of Ireland was under English control, though it would not be officially incorporated into the United Kingdom until 1798. As the 1600s progressed, England's role on the world stage only grew. They fought against Napoleon in Europe, expanding their naval dominance around the globe, but in the process, they gained territory all over the world. In North America, they took control of New France from the Dutch, giving them control of Canada. At the same time, they conquered and colonized Jamaica, Barbados, Trinidad, Tobago, Dominica, St. Lucia, and many other islands in the Caribbean. This would tie the empire closely to the transatlantic slave trade. In fact, at one point, Britain had more enslaved people in the Caribbean than all the other colonies combined. Meanwhile, in India, the British East India Company was growing rapidly. By the middle of the century, they controlled almost all of India, making it one of the largest parts of the empire. But they wouldn't officially take control of India until after the 1857 Indian Rebellion. This rebellion was sparked by rumors that the new Enfield rifle cartridges were greased with the fat of cows and pigs, which was offensive to both Hindus and Muslims. It would eventually be put down, but not without significant cost to the British. As a result, the British government took direct control of India, which would lead to the creation of the British Raj. The British would also conquer Australia, starting with the establishment of penal colonies in 1788 and 1790. This would lead to the colonization of New South Wales, Tasmania, and eventually Victoria and Queensland. Meanwhile, they would also colonize New Zealand and fight multiple wars against the Maori people. By the late 1800s, the scramble for Africa had begun. This was a period of rapid colonization of Africa by European powers, which resulted in almost the entire continent being colonized. In particular, Britain would gain control of Egypt, the Suez Canal, South Africa, the Gambia, Seychelles, Mauritius, Botswana, Lesotho, Swaziland, the Congo, Kenya, Tanzania, Zambia, Malawi, Zimbabwe, Mozambique, Namibia, South Africa, and Nigeria at its peak in the early 1900s. The British Empire covered over 30 million square miles and was home to over 450 million people, roughly a quarter of the world's population. In fact, at this point, the British Empire was the largest empire in history. But while the 1800s were largely a period of expansion, the 1900s would see the beginning of the end of the empire. The First World War was a costly affair for the British, and it drained their resources. This would contribute to the Russian Revolution and the rise of communism in Russia, something which would undermine British interests around the world. Following the war, there would be a period of peace before the Second World War broke out in 1939. Once again, the British would be involved in another costly conflict, which would result in the weakening of the empire, and in particular, it would result in the weakening of Britain itself. In Ireland, resentment against the British would grow and eventually boil over into the Irish War of Independence, which would see the creation of the Irish Free State. Meanwhile, in India, the British Raj would face increasing opposition from independence movements. In 1947, India would finally gain independence, but it would not be long before other parts of the empire would follow suit. In 1956, the Federation of Malaya would gain independence from the British, though they would remain part of the Commonwealth. After the Federation of Malaya, the British would lose more parts of their empire. Between the 1950s and 1970s, they lost Singapore, Ceylon, Ghana, Nigeria, Malaysia, Tanzania, Uganda, Kenya, Malta, Mauritius, Seychelles, Trinidad and Tobago, Barbados, Dominica, Guyana, Grenada, St. Kitts and Nevis, St. Lucia, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Antigua and Barbuda, St. John's, and St. Martin. One notable exception was Hong Kong, which would remain under British control until 1997. This was because the British had acquired Hong Kong Island during the First Opium War with China. The war had been started by the Chinese government trying to stop the opium trade. But in the end, the Chinese were defeated and the British gained control of Hong Kong. This would ensure the British had control of the South China Sea and the riches coming out of China. For the next 150 years, the British would control this important territory. The last major piece of the empire was the British Raj in India. But as mentioned earlier, the British Raj had been facing increasing unrest from independence movements. This culminated in the partition of India in 1947, which saw the creation of Pakistan and Bangladesh, and this marked the official end of the British Empire. Though the British Empire would come to an end in the mid-20th century, its legacy continues to this day. Its former territories are still very closely tied to the UK through the British Commonwealth. In addition to this, its impact on the world is undeniable. It introduced English to millions of people. It also led to the spread of democracy to several parts of the world. But unfortunately, it also left behind arbitrary borders which have led to instability in some regions. So what exactly was the British Empire? Well, the British Empire was a collection of territories which were either ruled or heavily influenced by the United Kingdom. These included colonies, protectorates, dependent territories, and areas controlled by the British East India Company. In terms of governance, the British Empire was highly diverse. Some areas were directly ruled by the British monarch, such as Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. Others were ruled by local monarchs who were placed there by the British, such as in India, where the British monarch was the titular head of state. Still others were essentially independent but were heavily influenced by the British government, such as Egypt and Siam. Another important aspect of the British Empire was the role of the viceroy. This was a high-ranking British official who was appointed to govern a part of the empire, such as India or Canada. They were essentially the representative of the monarch in these territories. The British Empire also had its own legal system, which was based on English common law. This system was highly influential and is still used in many countries today. In addition to this, the British introduced their own currency, the pound sterling, to many parts of the empire. Another key aspect of the British Empire was its economy. The empire was highly integrated and trade was conducted mainly through the sea routes which connected the different parts of the empire. This trade was often conducted using British ships and was heavily regulated by the British government. One important aspect of the British Empire's economy was the imperial preference trade system. This system gave preferential treatment to goods produced within the empire, such as lower tariffs. The British Empire was also highly diverse in terms of its population. It was home to people of all races and religions, though unfortunately, there was often tension between the different groups. In particular, the British often faced resistance from the native populations in the colonies. This resistance often took the form of rebellions and uprisings, such as the Indian Rebellion of 1857 and the Irish War of Independence. The British Empire also had a significant impact on world culture. It introduced English to millions of people and also promoted British values such as democracy and individual liberty. In addition to this, it also had a negative impact on local cultures. In some cases, the British actively tried to suppress local cultures, such as in Australia, where the British government tried to force the Aboriginal people to assimilate. Finally, the British Empire played a significant role in world history. It was the largest empire in history and had a profound impact on the world. It helped to spread British power and influence around the globe and also helped to shape the modern world. And now it's time for you to make your voice heard. Comment below which period of the British Empire was the most interesting. Was it the early colonial period or the later struggles for independence? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to check out my video on the Roman Empire. Thanks for watching.